still there?
Okay, I am going to unmute Victoria. Victoria, now you should be audible.
Oh?
Yes, there we go. That's perfect. And I am going to put the screen up. Just like that. Perfect. Look at this. We have a crazy screen. It's got both of us on it. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I saw you chatting in the chat. I really appreciate you engaging with people and talking and answering questions. I love when folks do that.
Yeah, you're a great chat.
It is a great chat. They're fantastic, and I think it adds a lot to have a dev in here. So what we typically do is you may have gathered just from sort of what's going on, but we typically have folks ask questions. And then we sort of talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about based on those questions. And so while you are here, I think you are really quiet. Let me see if I can increase the volume a little bit. We're gonna max it out. It is now maxed out. So fingers crossed. So some of these I think are directed towards you, and some of them are directed towards me. But you know, just chime in if you've got stuff that you want to say. So the first thing is directed at you, Victoria. How much do you think the initial absence of letters affected my playthrough? So from what I gathered, I was supposed to have gotten more letters or gotten letters earlier than I actually did.
I mean,
Or
usually
it's random,
letters.
yeah?
Yeah, it's random for sure. So
I must
sometimes, like some seasons, you might not get any letters.
Right.
It was just for a while you weren't getting any, I was afraid
yeah.
for the bug. But there wasn't.
No, it was just that random number generator.
Yeah.
Sometimes you roll the dice and it doesn't come up well. So I mean that actually brings up a really sort of interesting, to me at least, because I'm a systems designer at heart, interesting sort of systems question about using random numbers and the fact that random numbers just like stab developers in the back. I mean, that is they are the worst. Because stuff like this happens. Like, you know, statistically, it's really unusual that I would get a result like that I wouldn't get any letters for so long, for so many seasons in a row, right at the beginning of the game. But actually, there's sort of so many random events in a game. I'm going to say in a game like this, although actually Shrouded Isle doesn't have as many that, like, letters are the really big one that, like, sometimes you get one and sometimes you don't, and the other things are pretty much distribution problems. But if you don't get letters for a while, then you know that can really affect things. That can change the way that the game plays. I don't have a point here. I'm just I you know, I like this is a thing that I find interesting in terms of systems, and there are actually, like, what I encourage my students to do is think about different ways that you can distribute randomness that might not have the same effect. So I'm just going to draw an example from Shrouded Isle. There is all of the characteristics of the different villagers are random. You know, the kleptomaniac and the other things, the rebellious person, the teen, but there are like really pretty strict limits on how they can be distributed. So there's no way that you could, for example, end up with like all of the villagers are rebellious, because there's always just going to be one rebellious person. Like that's the limit. And so that's like a different way of, rather than looking at each individual one and rolling a die behind the scenes and saying, whatever this rolls, that is the characteristic that this person gets. There's a slightly more complicated algorithm that that does that. Sorry, Victoria, you probably don't care about any of this. This is just this is my bag.
Don't even worry about it.
Okay, all right.
Talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Sweet.
I'm interested, no matter what.
We're gonna move on. That's one of the dangers of having true randomness in a game, and so you have to do it sort of deliberately, I guess, thoughtfully. And I feel like this game, for what it's worth, doesn't do it, carelessly. It's just that one sort of aspect that has that kind of randomness. Okay, super interesting question that we can dig into, because this is more philosophical and less like game systemsy. Question of whether or not I am a monster, or just doing a job. And I'm going to come down on the side of I'm just doing a job. Like, this is what I was told to do. Just doing it.
I mean, look, you can consider it many different ways. But one of the things that I always think about when people are playing this game is, have you heard of the Stanford prison experiment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, you are doing your job.
No, it's true.
Someone did give you this job.
Yeah.
Whether or not you think you're a monster, that's up to chat for you to decide.
No, that's fascinating.
That's all you.
So, the thing that's really interesting about Stanford prison experiment in relation to this is, okay, oh God, I don't know where to go with this. So, the Stanford prison experiment, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is an experiment that was done by researchers at Stanford. That's where it gets the name. Where they brought people in off the street and told them that they had a job to do that involved reading questions and giving punishment to a person when they answered incorrectly, presumably to like encourage them to do better. And so they would read the question and hear the answer, and if the answer was wrong, then they would press a button that would apply an electric shock to the person. And the more wrong answers the person got, the greater the electric shock would become. Now, there was actually nobody getting shocked in this experiment. The person on the other side of the radio, because it wasn't face-to-face, it was like over a radio mechanism. The person on the other side of the radio was an actor who was following a script that involved getting a lot of the answers wrong and then reacting as though they were being shocked, like in pain. And the experiment was actually on how long will somebody do something that is objectively terrible just because they were told by a perceived authority figure that's what they're supposed to do. Am I getting that right, Victoria? Am I like...
You got another experiment that I was thinking of, but that's not the Stanford.
Oh, you're right. That's the... Am I describing the Milgram? I think I'm describing the Milgram experiment. Okay, so Stanford... Why don't you tell us about Stanford? I think I know what you're talking about, but okay, I got that totally wrong.
No, it's good. You know, there's a lot of experiments out there. Sometimes you get it wrong. It's fine. But super quick... Stanford prison experiment, they did also just get totally normal people off the streets, and they did assign roles to them. So one person or a group of people had to be the prisoners or the guards, and some other people were assigned the role of prisoner. And basically they just let them, they basically told them, oh, you have to discipline this person, do it however you want. And these people who are not naturally violent or anything because they were studied beforehand, they started becoming violent and more aggressive in their disciplinary measures. So that's the really core concept of it.
Yeah. As I recall, the prisoners and the guards were decided totally randomly. So yes. They just randomly assigned roles, but the guards... I want to say quickly, came to feel that because they had a position of authority, they had to sort of like treat the prisoners a certain way, even though the prisoners hadn't actually done anything wrong. They had just sort of been unluckily chosen for prisoners. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to think about that in the context of this. That is sort of about being given a role and growing into, not even growing into it, because you can imagine, like, my ideal of a prison guard should be somebody who is strict but fair, right? But in fact, that is not how people acted. People started abusing that power.
Exactly.
So the idea of abuse of power, I think, is this is a game about me being the sole arbiter of how the village is run and who lives and who dies. And because I have that power, I feel like it is only right for me to use it. I think that the Milgram experiment, which was probably not done at Stanford, so sorry, Stanford, I didn't mean to imply that or outright say it. The Milgram experiment also, I feel like, applies here, because there is a sense that I am being told by a perceived authority, this is the thing that I am supposed to do. And especially within the context of the game, right? The sort of like magic circle of playing a game, I'm gonna follow that authority, right? I feel like that absolves me of any responsibility for what actually happens, for what I'm actually doing.
Exactly, and you can just sacrifice members of your chat with no feelings of guilt. Exactly.
In fact, like a certain amount of glee. Sorry, chat. That's how that went. I mean, I get the sense that this game is designed explicitly to play with these kinds of philosophical ideas, to not reenact exactly, but to sort of hit upon the same unflattering aspects of human nature that some of these experiments also showed. Is that do you think that's the case? Is that the case, Victoria?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people interpret it how they want, but that's how I would like to interpret it.
Yeah. No. I get that. I mean, there's something I think really interesting and valuable about games that confront those kinds of, frankly difficult questions about our nature.
For sure, and there's so many games that kind of play on that dark kind of role, like even if it's like Inside or Black the Fall, there are so many games that kind of look into what people can do to each other, I suppose. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and I dig that. I am really into games that explore those topics in a thoughtful way. Because I think there are a lot of games that are just sort of about violence. And this feels like a game that is less, about violence and more using violence to explore the really dark, just the dark aspects of the way that societies work. Yes. Definitely.
It's really kind of meaningful to me how, like, I took my role as a prophet extremely seriously. Like that, getting dreams that were messages from my God, that was like an enormous reward. And ending the game by proving my faith by setting myself on fire,
a true martyr.
It felt like a fitting end. Like, I feel pretty good about that, actually. Like, I'm I'm bummed that we did not bring about the Blessed Apocalypse. But I do feel that, like, as a secondary, like, if we couldn't get that, at least, you know, I got to go out in blaze of glory.
It's true. I mean, everyone will remember you now.
Exactly. I will inspire the next generation to go on and worship Chernobog some more. All right. Okay. So next question is also directed at you. Did you see anything unexpected or different from this playthrough versus others, or did you see something that you think is worth mentioning in other streams that wasn't in this stream?
Honestly, I don't think so. I mean, every stream has reacted kind of differently, but all in all, like, at first, everyone, when they start playing the game, they're really confused. You're kind of confused. And as they keep playing, they start getting really into their role as the high priest, and so did chat. Like, they'd be like, yes, like, sacrifice me, or like, oh, like, yes, I'm a pervert. I'm so happy. Like, this is who I really am. So I don't know if I should be concerned about that, but that's generally what I've seen in all these streams.
No, that's pretty great. I like the I like the idea that chat gets to discover their own flaws, I guess, their own sins as the game progresses, for characters that are named after them. Yeah, so it took me a little bit to sort of understand the cycle of the game. But only, I mean, it really just took that first season.
Yeah.
The first season, I wasn't sure what was happening. The instructions were very clear, but there wasn't a lot of context for those instructions. Choosing 5 advisors. It's actually interesting because for me, not knowing how to play the game, choosing 5 advisors just with no information, I didn't have any information. If I were to go back and play the game again, I think it actually still feels kind of like that, because the first time that you choose advisors, you don't know very much about any of the characters. You haven't learned anything about any of the characters yet. So you're still just kind of choosing pretty blind that first season. Is that the case? Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, so one of the things that we consciously decided not to do was put an actual tutorial in the game. We found that basically it's more fun to discover everything yourself, and to, like, maybe miss something and then realize the next season, oh, like, I had inquiries, and oh, this is how I get inquiries, because just discovering a world by yourself is really rewarding. But also it kind of adds to kind of the mysteriousness of it. Like, we don't give any context to why you're really here and how you got here. It's all about your role,
right,
and figuring it out.
Which plays into that whole idea of, of just kind of blindly obeying authority or taking on the role that's assigned to you and potentially abusing the power that comes with it. Yeah, no, I totally see that. So we talk a lot about tutorialization on this stream, and there's a difference that you're bringing up between sort of full tutorialization and guidance, and this game does a really good job, I think, of guiding the player towards what they need to do in the moment, without, as you say, having a full tutorial that would explain or attempt to explain the consequences of every action. Which I agree with that decision. I think, frankly, it's a complicated system, and to try to explain it outright that you're choosing a set of characters from which you will be able to assign tasks, but also you will need to specify a sacrifice. Like at the beginning of the game, I'm not going to understand any of that. Like that just throws a lot of new concepts at me. But playing through a season, all of that becomes really, really clear. And as long as I never get stuck at any of the steps, I can learn it for myself. I can pick it up. Yeah. So the only job that the game needs to do is make sure that all of those individual steps are clear.
For sure. And with that, it came with its own challenges because, as you may have noticed, there's only like 2 colors.
Yeah.
The normal visual cues that we can give someone was really limited in terms of the UI. Like I saw in chat in the beginning, some people were like, why is this UI not clear enough? We're like, it's hard. We're sorry. Yeah, but we really wanted to challenge ourselves with the 2 colors.
So talk to me about that. Where did the idea of 2 colors come from?
Yeah, so the Shrouded Isle's art director, Erica, when we were doing the Game Jam version of this, she wanted to basically make a really polished looking game, but because usually game jams are done within 48 hours or 72 hours, she knew she didn't have a lot of time, so she decided to go with the 2-tone palette, and it actually really worked out in terms of the game's aesthetics.
Yeah. Very cool. So yes, as a sort of a minimalism, as a constraint to simplify the production of that art. Yeah, that makes sense. And then why the different palette options?
Yeah. So basically, oh man. So the color scheme that you're playing with, this second time after the black and white version. The first one was done because Erica had done a previous project that just kind of used those 2 colors and she liked it, so it kind of happened. And then we decided, we might as well add a different color scheme just to keep it interesting, and if someone doesn't necessarily like the colors, it works. But since the Shrouded Isle released, we have had some people just hate the color schemes,
really?
All of them. Or it was strange because in our betas and in all the tests, no one really complained about the colors, and when it launched, there were some people who loved the colors, some people who just were like, it's making me sick and I hate it.
Interesting.
So we decided to add in the black and white version just because for some people it was kind of difficult.
So the one that I was playing towards the end, that is the sort of more neutral version that is there to appease people who just really didn't like the other versions.
Yeah, and it was, it's strange how it never came up, I guess, in betas, but we added it, and that's why we had just patched the game right before you played it, because we wanted to make sure that it was out.
Yep.
But yeah, and we had some people, because it was on Kotaku, and I remember seeing a comment saying that the color scheme might have been difficult for them to play because of their visual impairments.
Sure.
And one of the things we want is that, anyone can play, so we decided to add in the black and white.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's funny that's the one that I ended up choosing, just because I really liked how the red popped off of it, because it is so neutral. But I really like the default color scheme. But I will say that one of the things that I like about it is that it's not easy to look at. It's a pair of colors that really kind of fight you. Which seems super appropriate to the game, but I can also understand why people might not love that.
Yeah, no, for sure. We were hesitant at first to have the very neutral black and white. But we did decide that, if it's legitimately hurting people,
no, totally. No. I think that's a good decision. But when I go back and play the game again, I will definitely switch it back to one of the other color sets, because I think there's something really neat about the way that it puts you on edge a little bit, which is I think the right place to be when you're playing this game. It walks a really neat line between, and this is the same stuff that you were talking about sort of Stanford and Milgram and pushing you, making you uncomfortable as a player with what you're doing. But it walks a really fine line between the feeling good, like getting into a flow of playing the game, feeling smart, feeling masterful, all of those things that we associate with gameplay and games that we enjoy, and never quite, always making you also feel a little bit uncomfortable. It reminds me, and I'm going to bring this up specifically because a lot of my chat is going to remember me playing Hotline Miami a couple of years ago, which is a game that I think ostensibly tries to do the same thing. It's a game that is very much about sort of the flow of the moment in a context that is extremely uncomfortable. But it has a very different approach to that idea, obviously, than Shrouded Isle does. I'm sorry, I'm just... Hotline Miami, I don't know if you played it. Hotline Miami made me super uncomfortable.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah,
I've only played a little bit of it.
It really did. It, I mean, like, I also got into the game, and there were, moments of, like, feeling super victorious. But there's a lot of that game that is, very, very, very violent, and displays that, and made me feel really uncomfortable playing it, in a way that was different, a lot different than playing this game. This game was gosh, I'm trying to think, because there is a discomfort to playing Shrouded Isle as well, but it's not as visceral, I guess. The discomfort is much more intellectual. The game is much more intellectual. Hotline Miami is just a visceral game all the way around. Mm-hmm. Shrouded Isle is much more a game about sort of like being presented with a problem and thinking through the problem and sort of being aware that the sort of context of the problem is horrific.
For sure, yeah. It's not a fast-paced game.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which I think that's taste. I like that better. I like a slower-paced game. Cool. All right. Thanks for working through that with me.
Helping you discover new truths about yourself.
Exactly. Hey, that's what this show is about. All right. So another question. This is interesting. I'm curious about this. Was the ability to name villagers added with live streaming in mind? Was that specifically designed for Twitch?
Yep, that was basically the only reason we added that.
And has that worked out so far?
Yeah. Even when you're playing just with someone beside you, being able to name someone after like chat or whatever, people get really attached to it. Like, it's them. Like I said, like their vices, the vices become like their vices, the virtues become their virtues. And then sometimes they get kind of offended if they're sacrificed. But...
I mean, there was interesting, I saw, it would be really fun to do like some kind of an analysis of the conversation around chat watching this game be played. Because I saw a lot of like arguing about how accurate those randomly assigned traits were to the people that I had sort of randomly named, which is, funny. It's funny that would become there's a secondary game there, or at least there's a secondary sense of play of sort of like watching that. It's really just like it's the pattern searching. It's looking at sort of all of these random elements that have been put together, and a shared context of we all know who each other are in this community, and sort of laughing about the things that are recognizably true or false or meaningful, somehow meaningful out of the sort of the noise of that. But there's also a personalization. There's also like, this is a game that allows you to bring other people into it and make it personal for them.
Exactly, and it's not every day that you can be like, yeah, I am a thief. It's great.
So, at what point was that decision made? At what point did Kitfox sort of recognize that this was possible for this game, and decide to go that way?
To add the renaming?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always kind of been in the back of our minds.
Okay.
Because of our last game, Moon Hunters, like a lot of people love streaming it together, and we've always been fans of being able to like play a game together, and Twitch being an extension of that, like letting like a whole community basically play a game together. We've always kind of wanted to add in that little element of, oh, like you guys can be a part of a cult too.
Yeah.
Because everyone wants to be part of a cult.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be part of a cult.
Who does? Yeah. Right.
No, I mean, yes, that's we're halfway there with a Twitch channel, I think.
Exactly. Basically, we just want to make cults everywhere. That was
all right. So, Victoria, another question directed at you about your role as a community manager at Kitfox. What's it like? Here, I'm just going to read the question. What's it like being a community manager for a game? Is it difficult work? Is it enjoyable?
Are we talking about this game in particular, or just all games, or all the games we've done?
I answer the way that you want to answer it. I think that's ambiguous.
Okay. You know what? I'll answer just in general then.
Okay.
Games, if anyone's interested in community management. Yeah, I mean, you have to have a certain temperament for it, because no matter what, community management is basically being like the punching bag for the game devs. And I've talked to like a lot of other community managers, so I've been in contact with the creators of Don't Starve, and I'm in contact with one of the like community managers for Assassin's Creed. But it's basically, everyone basically agrees that it's kind of the same thing, where you are the punching bag for it. And if you love it, that's awesome, because you're the one who also like receives all the compliments. You get to see the reaction of all the fans. You get to tune in to all the like streams and basically tell the dev like how everything's going. But it's also, it's like you sometimes internalize some of the bad things you see. Like every time I see like a negative Steam review, I'm like, darn, darn, like that hurts me a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, I think. It's not for everyone, but if being able to like really interact with the community is your kind of thing, then I definitely say it's awesome. I feel like I forgot the original question.
Do you mind if I ask what your background is, Victoria?
Yeah, so educationally, I do have a degree in sociology with a minor in communications. So not necessarily like marketing background or anything like that, and I've worked in marketing jobs, not necessarily related to gaming.
Okay.
And then I got into basically, I did some, I basically worked for a company that other game companies could outsource social media management to, and I did that for a bit. And then I'm at Kitfox, and that's my background. Cool.
Very cool. And do you see your role in community management as being really a part of the marketing of the game?
Yeah, for sure. I think community management is a very new kind of job, especially for gaming, because gaming itself is kind of new relative
Sure.
to other industries, I guess. But I do think it's integral in terms of marketing, in terms of all that, because if if any of you are game devs or have been in game design, like release, pre-release, if you want to do a Kickstarter, all of that is so important, and being able to have someone who knows their way around that and be able to measure the kind of community response and give like tips on that is very important.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, it's amazing. It's really fascinating to watch how the landscape of games is evolving. And 5 years ago, there was a big move towards sort of games that have an online component. Team Fortress and that kind of thing inspired a lot of people to say essentially that offline games are not the future. The future is somehow persistently online. And I don't know that has entirely played out in the way that we imagined that it might. But the idea that online communities are a part of the ecosystem that the game lives in is now completely pervasive. I mean, that's just everywhere. It's true for every game, whether it is an online game or not.
For sure, if your game, it's the only way. Like with all the Steam games coming out recently, especially with Steam Direct, like just being able to like kind of push through is more important than ever.
Right. No, that's super true. Okay. So this is a question that's directed at me. Do you feel that the game gives you enough clues to know what the consequences of your actions might be while still being surprising enough? So we touched on this before. That idea of being surprising enough is really interesting. I kind of want to unpack that. But one of the things that I was thinking about this game in terms of giving cues and helping to sort of understand what's going on, because it's not fully tutorialized, it's really important that the consequences of actions are clearly communicated, because that becomes the way that as a player I'm learning anything about the game. I don't know ahead of time, before I play the first time, I don't understand exactly what it means to choose each of the 3 advisors in a month, or I don't necessarily know the consequences of any of the things that I do. So in order for me to understand that, the reactions of the game, the sort of like consequences coming back, need to be communicated really clearly. But I feel like part of the way that the game is designed is that there's a really pretty reasonable level of recovery to any of the mistakes that you can make early on. It's interesting because now that I think about it, it sort of has to be designed that way, because when you start the game, even if I go in now and I understand the way that the game cycle works, I'm given so little information at the start, because so much of the game is about sort of gradually uncovering that information. It's really easy for me to make some unlucky choices in the first season, and get off to sort of a bad start. Or there's a big difference between how good or bad my start might be based on how lucky I get choosing some different characters.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to explore games that purposefully conceal things, or like
Sure.
an unreliable, I guess, quotation mark narrator that you have to kind of unravel yourself.
No, totally. The unreliable narrator, like, that's an interesting connection. Yeah. I mean, definitely playing with that lack of information. But, and so in some ways it feels, kind of, I keep wanting to just relate everything that is procedural to roguelike genre.
I've heard a lot of people on stream kind of describe this as a roguelike, and I was like,
it's
I've
funny.
never thought of that.
Like it is in so many ways so different, but just the fact that it is procedural and therefore you can get unlucky or lucky at the start, and that can have an effect on where you go. But one of the characteristics of roguelikes, in my mind, that certainly isn't true of all of them, but I think it's generally pretty true, is that if you get unlucky at the start, then you're pretty hosed. Like, it is hard to recover from that. Whereas I feel like Shrouded Isle, the sense that I got, certainly, like, I got into some trouble. I felt like I got into trouble a couple of times, and I was always able to get back out of it. And I didn't quite get high enough to be okay at the end of the game, but I never got overthrown, and that was a victory. But it is actually not that hard, or it didn't seem that hard to me to recover from the sort of initial mistakes and then get back to some sense of equilibrium. Like the getting off to a bad start didn't seem like it would affect my entire run.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what your question is, or if there's a question.
No, I mean, maybe there's not one. That's fine. That's totally fine. Okay.
I will say, though, that you had enough fervor.
I had enough fervor. I thought I had enough fervor. Okay, so clearly I'm gonna have to play the game again to figure out what went wrong and why I got the ending that I did. So that's interesting. Maybe it's because I didn't. I'm sorry. Now I'm just speculating about your game. Maybe it's because I didn't sacrifice all 7 of the sort of major sinners that were in my midst. So I want to hit really quick on the term that was used in this question. Was the game still surprising enough? How important is that idea of surprise in this game?
I wouldn't say surprise is the word we're going for. It would be more mystery. Yeah. We're not, because there's nothing, I would say, too surprising about this game. It's more like you're not sure what you're getting into.
Yeah.
At no point in the game, like in the beginning, especially with no tutorial and all that, it's like, are you sure what's happening? You don't know what ending you're looking for, and you don't know if these endings are going to be quotation mark good in the sense of the word.
Right.
Because you are running a cult.
Right.
That sacrifices people.
Right. That's true. I mean, yeah. What does good mean anymore?
Yeah.
No, that's true. That's true. I think mystery is a good term that's sort of in theme. This is clearly a occult, a cosmic horror kind of setting. And mystery is always, I think, an important part of that genre. a sense of sort of not knowing exactly what's going on, and trust. So I was gonna say surprise. To me, surprise comes into the game not frequently, but occasionally when a villager reveals some kind of a major virtue or flaw at a particularly inopportune or opportune moment, which I think happened to me once or twice, but I can imagine happening with a reasonable frequency. That I have somebody whose qualities are unknown, and it turns out that they have like really a big effect that I wasn't expecting.
True. That's true.
And that, because that is sort of so tied to characters, it's almost a trust and betrayal kind of a mechanic. Like that, I feel when somebody turns out to have a major flaw or a major sin, and just totally hoses my numbers for a round, that feels like a betrayal. That feels like somebody that I thought I could trust was actually not who I thought that they were, which again seems really super in theme to me.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think I totally forgot about that part just because I played this game for so many times.
Totally.
I'm just like, nothing surprises me. Okay, cool. You're terrible.
Everybody's terrible. Okay, all right. I got a couple more questions. Do you mind sticking around for a few more minutes, Victoria?
Yeah,
I don't want to keep you. Okay. So question, I really liked how at first the sacrifice mechanic meant you have to balance picking useful advisors with picking useful sacrifices, but as the game progressed, it didn't actually seem that meaningful. Do you think it could be improved in some way to make it work better? Also, Captain Amber says, thank you for never sacrificing me. You are welcome, Captain Amber. I assure you that was an entirely practical decision. So, okay, there is an interesting arc to that tension, because it's certainly true that in the first few rounds of the game, when I don't know a lot about different characters, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing. Like okay, here's a question for you, Victoria, because you've played this game a bunch and you've seen people play this game a bunch. My first time through, I felt like the arc of my experience was the first few rounds, I was not arbitrarily picking people, but I was picking people that I wanted to know more about, really. And then I was focusing less on the number outcomes, except where I was in like real dire straits. Yeah. And so I would often get to each year I kind of had to decide who I was going to pick as my advisors out of the 5. And when I got to the end of the season, I had to like decide who to sacrifice. And then gradually that shifted so that by the end of the game, I was really picking who my advisors were going to be and who I was going to sacrifice before the season started. Like when I picked my 5, I already knew everything that I was going to do. Is that common for every play of the experience, or is that a first-time player sort of experience?
Like that whole arc and stuff?
Yeah, that arc. Is that like, if I play the game again, am I going to have a similar kind of arc, or is that really just characteristic of playing the game for the first time?
Honestly, I haven't seen a lot of people play it like a second time around. Usually I just tune into like, one stream.
Sure.
But yeah, I've seen most arcs like go like that because it's all about like discovering, learning more about people or your villagers, I suppose, and then really being strategic about it. And it's interesting in that at first everyone's interested in kind of like learning more about the person, and then suddenly becomes like a numbers game. It's like, okay, now I know you are like a major vice, so I'm just going to keep you. And they kind of almost lose a sense of humanity with that, because before it's like a little bit more like that's so funny, like I found out that you're maybe disobedient.
Yes.
Now it's like, I want to kill you. It's gonna happen.
Okay, so maybe you can't answer this that well either because you haven't observed a lot of people playing multiple times, but and your own experience is pretty different because you're a developer and you've played it a lot. But I am going to say that, like, for me, it was really interesting. I love what you just said about the humanity getting erased from these virtual characters, because for me, the first couple of rounds of the game, the only information that I had to go on were these, like, lovely little descriptions. Like, you know, this person does karate on the cliffside every morning. This person, I think that they are probably illiterate. Like, those kinds of, like, things, little descriptive things that are non-mechanical, it turns out, that humanize the characters. That's all the information that I have, and so that's how I make my decisions. Yeah. And then as I learn sort of the stats of the characters, that's all that I look at. I stop caring about any of the sort of humanizing descriptive text and only look at them as tools that I can use to certain ends.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I've seen monitoring, I guess, the feedback to this, is that a lot of people have been describing the Shrouded Isle and kind of attaching it to a big company or political figure that they don't like. They're just like, this is basically like like a AAA company. This is how they treat all their, like, employees, and it's so interesting because so many people have done that.
Is there consensus around that? Like, is it always the same, or is it? Do people sort of pick their own demons?
Yeah, people just pick their most hated, like,
whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, and they're like, it's exactly the same. Uncanny.
Oh, funny. That's funny. All right, I got one more. I feel like there's a culture surrounding stat management games like this one, of them being kind of unpopular, which is why we don't see that many these days. Do you think that's true? And if so, what do you think should be done to change it? That's an interesting sort of second part to that. I mean, my sense is that the audience for slower paced games is smaller than the audience for sort of fast paced action real time games. I'm curious, Victoria, if you have a similar sense, and if so, what do you think drew Kitfox to this genre, especially as a follow-up to a more action-oriented style of game in Moonhunters?
Yeah, I think I will agree with you in that generally right now, games have to have like some sort of like action-based thing to be that exciting, or at least to catch your eye at first. Especially because, like, I think a lot of people can see this game, and if they strip away like all the context of it, they're like, it's just moving bars up and down. Like, that's all you're doing.
Right.
And honestly, like, that's fine because it is, I guess, a niche genre right now. But whether or not, like, how it can be improved, I think it's just tapping into, like, the people who might not even know that they like this kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, like, it's right now, games are still, like, you know, kind of male-oriented, and being able to appeal to different kinds of people and with different themes. Like, I've seen so many people try this game out, even though they didn't think they would like it, just because the theme was interesting. I think it's just
Sure.
that. It's like trying to just get the word out and trying different things with it and seeing what sticks with people and what doesn't.
I mean, I'm trying to think of the sort of set of games of this style that I'm familiar with, and I think there are a bunch that touch on it, to some extent or another. This may become my new go-to because nobody recognizes my references to Hanako Games' Cute Night. I don't. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay,
Sorry.
so no, not at all. This was a niche game 15 years ago when sort of I discovered it, that in some ways bears some similarity to Shrouded Isle, although in its subtleties it is very, very different. But it introduced me to the sort of time management, stat management genre of games that I think this carries on a tradition for. One of the things that I really like about Shrouded Isle is how... I mean, this is a little odd given how much mystery is sort of embedded in it, but how predictable it is. There is a very set cycle to the play, and that cycle doesn't change, and you sort of get a sense of it very, very quickly. And then you can sort of... You don't have all of the information that you need to, like, solve the puzzle, but you understand the form of what you're going to be doing for the next 12 turns. And I think that well, I don't know. I like that, but that might just be a preference. I don't know if that actually makes the genre more accessible or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, there's so many different kinds of games in the world, and if it's not your kind of thing, I don't think it's like, oh, you should like this kind of game.
Right.
Yeah, whatever floats your boat. You enjoy whatever game you want to enjoy.
No, I certainly agree with that. And I think that's a good note to end on. So, Victoria, thank you so much.
Oh,
where?
It's from Fox Dash.
Okay, all right. I was going to answer this offline because I don't have a good answer for it, but let's talk about it.
Oh, sorry.
No. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. Because Fox Dash, thanks for asking the question. So here's the question. It's regarding atmosphere and comparison with Darkest Dungeon, and I have not played Darkest Dungeon, so I do not have expertise here. I am a big fan of the overall ambiance of... Oh god, the chat moved. Overall ambiance of Shrouded Isle, and it just dawned on me that it may share genre overlap with Darkest Dungeon. Is there an emerging style in games that has some origin as its root? So Victoria, if you have any expertise on Darkest Dungeon specifically, or if there is an explicit connection between that game and Shrouded Isle, I would love to hear about that. Otherwise, I can just talk about cosmic horror in popular fiction.
That's interesting, though, because I've seen a lot of people compare Shrouded Isle to Darkest Dungeon, and while we, like, super love Darkest Dungeon as a team, there was no, like, we had, at the time it was being, like, created in terms of the art style, we were not thinking of Darkest Dungeon at all. It's really interesting, I think, that people, like, bring it up. I'm not sure if it's because of, like, the darkened eyes or, like, I guess that cosmic horror sense that draws people to connect the two. Yeah, it's really interesting, and if we're talking about emerging style of cosmic horror, I don't know, I think, again, there's, like, so many games. I mean, like, Dream Daddy came out, and that's not cosmic horror.
No.
So...
No, not super. No, it's pretty different. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, like, I don't think that I don't think that it's overwhelming. And in fact, I'm curious, it would be interesting to do some kind of a survey of how popular that genre or style or those tropes are. over time, because certainly in other media, they've been around for a while. And there are lots of novels and movies that sort of touch on these same kinds of ideas. I don't know if it's getting more and more popular in games, or if we're just sort of recognizing it now. But it's certainly, what I would say is that there is plenty of evidence of it in popular culture, and I would point actually to the first season of True Detective, which played a lot with the sort of themes and language of Lovecraft, although it ultimately sort of skirted anything traditionally supernatural. And that is one of the hallmarks of the cosmic horror, and actually something that I'm not to imply a direct connection between that show and Shrouded Isle, but I think Shrouded Isle, similarly, the narrative of this game at no point convincingly acknowledges the existence of anything supernatural. It suggests, I mean, certainly, I am in a world where I believe in all kinds of supernatural stuff, and I am presented with things that it is easy for me to draw sort of inferences about, and to see the supernatural in. I have dreams that I consider prophetic. But they could just be dreams. I mean, this could just easily be an island full of people that I am gradually murdering for no reason. And the game sort of, at least getting the ending that I got, the game, doesn't make a statement on whether the supernatural actually exists. And I think that is a specific type of this really mystery-heavy subgenre of cosmic horror that is about sort of our ability to see strange things in the world, and the suspicion that there is a greater meaning to all of those things, and the acknowledgement that it's impossible to know whether that's true or not.
Exactly.
Okay.
Good observation there.
Great. Well, then that's a good note for us to end on. Victoria, thank you so much for giving so much of your time. I really appreciate you hanging out in the chat, and I really appreciate you talking with me for so long in this Q&A.
No, thank you for inviting me. Your chat's awesome. It was fun watching you play. I enjoyed being on here.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear it. Thank you everybody for being here, and check out Shrouded Isle. Totally recommend this game. Play it with your friends and name all of the characters after your friends, and then murder them, possibly for no reason. It's fun, believe me. Okay, I hope that everybody has a great weekend. I will see everybody next week. There will be emotes. Oh yeah, I'm gonna put that graphic back up. But thank you again, Victoria. And have a great night, and goodbye to everybody.
Bye, everyone.